I suppose you are recording it also, no? Just for safety's sake, recording soon.
No need. There's no need.
So over to you, Henry.
Thank you, Father. Good evening, everyone. Respected chief guest, resource persons, fathers, sisters, and brothers. First of all, thank you for joining us online for the inaugural lecture of JD Center for Science and Religion on the topic 19 months with COVID-19, challenges, responses, and possibilities. Before we start, let us all pause for a while and invoke God's blessing in the silence of our heart. Amen, and thank you. Allow me to introduce the resource persons of the day. Firstly, alphabetical order, we have Dr. Donald Frolich. He is a professor of biology at the University of St. Thomas, Houston, Texas. He teaches introductory biology and a capstone in evolutionary theory. He is also a visiting professor at Jnanadeep Institute, Pune. Secondly, we have Dr. Felipe Piedra. He is an instructor in the Department of Molecular Virology and Microbiology at the Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas. He is a generalist with training and interested in biophysics, virology, evolutionary biology, and semiotics. Both of them will be speaking to us for 15 minutes each, one after the other, followed by question and answer time. I call upon Dr. Francis Gonsalves to take over. Over to you, Father.
So thank you very much, Henry. And good evening, resource persons, sisters and brothers. Good evening or good morning, as the case may be. You've gathered together for a very interesting sharing. This evening, the JD Center for Science and Religion Studies, to discuss about something which has hit us very hard. The past 19 months with COVID-19 have been terrible for all of us. And it has affected each and every sphere of human activity. It was something unexpected, and we're still trying to grope in the dark, so to say, trying to find some answers, trying to make meaning of this COVID pandemic. Today it's very interesting that we are discussing about two sciences, so to say, side by side. Science and faith or religion. Now, science is normally regarded as, a discipline which has the answers to everything. Because most people have a lot of faith in science, so to say, because it provides us all the answers. But today, the world of medicine and science is kind of fumbling, trying to grope in the dark to find solutions, to find some answers. And it's going to be a very, very difficult journey so far and also ahead. The same with religion. Now, religion seems to be giving people a lot of consolation, a lot of solace in facing difficulties in life. But now religion also is somehow or the other in, locked down. And people are trying to, follow worship services online. The whole question of church is broken down, so to say, of community. Now they say good fences make good neighbors. So science has to respect, its own methodologies, way of investigation. And so religion too. Now, the point I think is very important is not to see science and religion as, two disciplines that are trying to outplay each other or find answers. I think the more important thing would be to see how these two disciplines give us some solutions or some guidelines for people. I think at stake during this COVID-19 pandemic is the plight of people, and not only people in general, but the poor in particular. I'm sure there's a kind of leavening because everybody's affected by the pandemic, but you look at the people who have suffered, unequally, so to say. And here in India, this part of the world, we've seen people thrown out of jobs, people walking along the highway, carrying huge loads, carrying, their parents on their back and all kinds of things. And now what studies are saying that the people who are worst affected are the women. Obviously, there's a lot of domestic violence. Children, can you imagine children a year and a half just in front of a computer screen? In the villages, there is nothing like online because there's no electricity very often, or there's no mobile phone or whatever. So we really don't know what the situation is. That is one. And second is with regard to the countries which are suffering, I think, unequally, but even the so-called rich countries, the US or Western Europe, they have suffered, but how much compared to the so-called poorer countries of the global South? That is something we can think about. And then the uncertainty of the third wave. Now, nobody's sure whether it's third wave or fourth wave or how many more waves we are going to have. But I'm sure this is going to be a very interesting discussion because we have two scientists over here who are going to give us their take on things. And the majority of us in this webinar belong to Jnana Deep. Trying to get the pronunciation right, Philippe. Right? Jnana Deep is the light of knowledge. So we are seeking knowledge and we are seeking light. And we're hoping that, through this dark tunnel, we see the light at the end. But as yet, we really don't know when and where that true light will really come. We're very happy that both of you are here. So the procedure will be as such. I'm not going to spend any more time because I know they're waiting for the experts, so to say, the scientists to begin speaking. So I think Don will speak first for about 15 minutes that way. And then maybe Philip after that for another 15 minutes or so. And we'll keep it open then for question and answer and clarification. All right. And I think around a little before the time, I'll just give you a small warning so you can conclude. So I now hand over to Don. Don, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Francis. That was a great introduction. Yeah, it was a perfect introduction, and I think Felipe and I are going to change the format right off the bat. Felipe is actually going to set the groundwork and explain, and then I'm going to say a few words. I do want to make one correction on the introductory slide that Kuru put out, which is a really nice slide. I'm not a virologist. I'm an evolutionary biologist primarily. Of course, we deal a lot with, there are highly generalized models that we apply across the board because that's what science does, of course. We're interested in, if you will, explaining the universe or explaining nature in as few testable hypotheses as possible. So Felipe on the other hand, his nickname, Fele or Dr. Fele is a true virologist. And I am very grateful to have him with us today because he knows a lot about the specifics of the topic, and we got together electronically and talked about this, and I think he's put together an interesting approach to this. We also want to leave the vast majority of the time to answer your questions and hear your observations. So without further ado, Philip, please.
Thank you, Don. Thank you for giving me time to sort out my slideshow through Zoom. And thank you, Francis, again, for beautiful introductory remarks. Don claims I'm a true virologist. I'm not sure that's the case. No, I am a virologist, but I do insist on emphasizing that I'm a generalist. And the nature of my short slideshow is consistent with that. So again, it's my honor to be here. Thank you, Kuru, for inviting me to present to the Nyana Deep Center for Science Religion Studies. Today, I'm going to talk to everyone. I hope everyone can see me and see my slides as well. Can someone confirm that?
Yes.
Yes, yes, we can.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. But I'm going to discuss the pandemic we're living through as a paradox, one requiring the preservation of life within a system, a global system that denies its flourishing. Now, as we all know, we're roughly 19 months into this pandemic, COVID-19. COVID-19 is the name for a disease caused by SARS coronavirus 2. If we look at the official counts worldwide, there have been 219 million cases with 4.55 million deaths. And that means that around 3% of all of us have been infected. And of all of those infected, around 2% have died. This is a staggering event. Of course, we all know that the United States and India are among the world's leaders in the absolute number of cases and in the number of deaths. And even though the pandemic has caused untold suffering, it's interesting that most infections are mild to asymptomatic. And the chance of severe illness increases strongly with age and with the presence of comorbidities, where the comorbidities can be any number of conditions, including asthma, autoimmune disease, cardiovascular disease, chronic lung disease, gastrointestinal or liver disease, hypertension, metabolic disease, neurologic disease, immune suppression, obesity, and renal disease. All of these things increase the likelihood of severe COVID-19. In fact, in the United States, only 8% of all COVID-19 associated hospitalizations of adults involve no known comorbidities. So it's clear that this pandemic preys on those of us who are most susceptible. So now I want to discuss the grand challenge, which is always the grand challenge within this pandemic and outside of it. It's preserving life. But again, we find ourselves within the pandemic. Do we have the technical means, that is therapeutics? Do we have the hospitals needed to preserve life? In a way, the answer is yes. And it is pretty extraordinary that in very rapid time, we've generated with the global biomedical community, large corporations in particular, making use of mostly NIH-funded research from the United States, have generated effective vaccines against SARS-2. So just focusing on vaccines, we clearly have the means to preserve life within and through this pandemic. But what about the supportive context, the socioeconomic context we find ourselves in? Is that one supportive of the preservation of life within and through the pandemic? The answer is obviously no. And this is just an image of men in the New York Stock Exchange, tense about something. Of course, we're organized around greed. As the American philosopher Charles Sanders Peirce put it, we're worshipers of the greed god. At least that's how our global society is organized and has been for the last 200 years or more. So the supportive context is one that's inimical to the preservation of life. And I went to Kuru's website and found one of his preferred notions. And he's characterizing India specifically as scientifically forward, religiously inward, and economically backward. It's this backwardness that we're suffering from. And it's not just India, of course, it's the United States and world you can characterize as scientifically forward, but instead of religiously inward, globally, we're sort of religiously, spiritually void. We don't have much to say. And we're also economically backward. This is a terrible combination. And the pandemic is making that clear. So that's the paradox, the one that I used to title my brief remarks before getting into something like a question and answer session or a discussion. How do we act to preserve life within a system that denies its flourishing? So the only way to resolve the paradox, of course, is by changing the supportive conditions that are against the preservation of life. But going with the theme of today's lecture, I want to remark on bright possibilities within our general response to the pandemic. So what is the general response anyway? It is taken across countries over the world. It is the general response or it's analogous to the general response we find in whole organisms to single cells in the face of an acute stress. It's a stress-induced response. And that stress-induced response leads to inflammation. And that inflammation, or the organism as a whole, whether it's a single cell or something multicellular, the organism acts to relieve that inflammation through adaptation and ideally survival. If the adaptation works, the organism survives, and surviving entails renewed growth and development. If the adaptations fail, or if the organism fails to adapt to the stress leading to the inflammation, there's continued disease. Regardless, new behaviors emerge. So the pandemic is an acute global stress leading to a general stress response among all of us. And it will lead to new behaviors. And one question is, well, what ultimately will come out of this new set of behaviors? Well, it's partly our responsibility to decide. So I want to focus on one bright animating possibility, and that's that society is changed such that it does begin to preserve life and promote its flourishing. The idea of such a society is a bright possibility that animates some fraction of our global response to this extremely stressful event. In the United States and globally, I think this means building a social safety net geared toward the needs of a healthy earth and healthy people by prioritizing, among other things, affordable and accessible healthcare. That's quite obvious, but more generally, the means to live healthy and purposeful lives. And in the United States, at least, this might involve things like a universal basic income that is making sure no one does not have the means to afford adequate food or shelter. And a universal basic income in a sane world could be funded through a carbon tax, right? It could be funded through a tax on luxury items, etc. We also need to encourage democratization of all entities, public and private. Right? We need democratization across scales. That would be huge in helping us move toward a global society that not only preserves life within the face of an acute stress like the COVID-19 pandemic, but one that is supportive of the flourishing of life. And then we also need to prioritize the common, right? Parks, infrastructure, promoting sustainability of all kinds. It's just a small sampling of the things that we have to do to get out of the pandemic and improve the world. So that's it. I actually don't have any more slides to present. And of course, as Dawn said, I am a virologist, but I chose to focus on the pandemic as paradox because that's what I think about most of the time. So I'll stop now and take any questions.
Shall we have both the presentations and then take questions?
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Sorry.
Francis, though, go ahead.
What do you prefer, Don? Do you want
to? No, I mean we're here to act as resources. I don't have a separate slide presentation because I think not only are the data complex, but I think the general story is well known. I can make a few remarks as an evolutionary biologist. I can actually. Feli and I have been collaborators since about 2017, and it'll be almost 5 years here. And interestingly, our conversations tend to virtually always involve the kinds of topics that he so well put together. And that has to do with basically the the role of paradox in our lives. We are both scientists, and we do both work in a maybe me on a more theoretical basis. We work within an evolutionary framework. I think at one level, as a scientist, the problem that we're facing now is widespread. It is absolutely not uncommon in nature. And at one level, it's not a very complicated problem. SARS viruses are known to have crossed species barriers, if you will, and caused, I won't call them pandemics, but they certainly have caused epidemics. The biology is pretty straightforward. This group of coronaviruses exists in nature. It undoubtedly is much more diverse than we currently know. Interestingly, I'm going to say parasitizes bats. Okay. Bats, because of the way that they feed, probably are known to have very strong immune responses to virtually everything. Many bats, not all bats, eat mammalian blood. Some eat the blood of birds. Some eat the blood of actually reptiles. Birds are reptiles in our world. Okay, so they're constantly, which means bats are constantly exposed to whatever pathogens and symbionts exist in the host that they feed upon. So you can imagine that a bat has a very heightened immune system, right? So in other words, by heightened immune system, I mean an immune system that's pretty resistant, pretty good at fighting off these kinds of parasites, if you will, that exist in their food's blood. Okay, so if you put these now hosts, which would be bats, all together, that contain, some of whom contain viruses, in a market, right? You concentrate a population, you make that population very dense, and then you expose it to another host, which in this case were humans, because bats are for sale. Then you've set up now a situation where over and over a new host is exposed to a population of viruses. It's statistically simply a matter of time before some variation of that virus is going to be of the sort of variation that it can actually survive in the new host. Once it survives in the new host and replicates and becomes transmissible between those new hosts, you have what we have now. In most of our opinions, and I am very aware that every last person in our discussions that are right here today in our little Zoom community at 8:26 a.m. Friday, my time, has access electronically to a host of information on the internet and disinformation. But most of us feel that the evidence says that this concentration of bat hosts gathered in Wuhan, China, and in what I would call a perfect storm. It's winter. It's right at the beginning of a celebratory season, celebration of the new year. People are going to be going back to their villages. There are traditional meals that are served, one of which that are served more often than they are served at other times of year. One of those dishes, however it's prepared, happens to start and maybe end with live bats. So now you have a situation where a potentially new host is really, the statistical exposure to that potential new parasite has gone up just in terms of real numbers. Okay, and it just so happens that that event does happen. It is transmissible. People disperse from that center of infection. In fact, they disperse all over the world. Now, what are we dealing with? The virus is replicating. We have strains everywhere. We have alpha, beta, gamma, delta variants. We know, we're almost certain. Scientists are never 100% certain. There will be other variants. Whether the effects of those variants on human health, how that's going to interact with what Felipe has described as a living paradox, that depends on the conditions of the paradox. But the variants will continue to arise. We can't really predict what the effects on human health will necessarily be. If any of you happen to see in your internet wanderings, President Biden's comments yesterday, he very clearly stated there will be another pandemic. Biologists like Felipe and myself have been predicting for decades. I'm 2.5, 3 decades older than Felipe. My professors were predicting a pandemic. As populations increase, as densities increase, the chances of that happening, especially as members of those populations become more mobile, right? Okay.
Don,
yes.
No, I just wanted to, I'm sorry to interrupt. I wanted to thank you for your brilliant nuts and bolts explanation of everything: virology, epidemiology, evolution, culture, impinging on the pandemic we're living through. And I just wanted to say that what I know is obvious to you and probably most of the people listening, any given pandemic, of course, will resolve itself in a way, right? We're adapting to the virus as it's adapting to us. It is like a wildfire that will die. But like you said, too, there will be others. And the more unsustainable our global society is, right, the more it hits against natural boundaries that it should not hit against. Of course, the more likely these events will be. Perfect storms become very common when you have 8 billion people on the face of the earth living in modes collectively that need to change.
You had another point, Felipe?
No, I was reading a question in the chat by Atul Peter.
Oh, okay. I was going to let Francis moderate the questions.
I see.
So,
Okay.
or Henry, or whoever's doing. I really don't have anything to say other than expect pandemics. Everyone acts like this is a new phenomenon. It's not. And I don't mean to downplay it. both Felipe and myself have been deeply touched by the level of human suffering, and we don't understand on a personal level what that really is, but we can only imagine. So I'm done. I have nothing else to say.
No. So thank you again, Don. I do want to say, touching on or going back to Francis's introductory remarks, since you brought up suffering and comparing suffering in the global South to suffering in more developed countries like the United States, it's, we're outside of the realm of valid quantitativeness when we ask such questions, right? Suffering is deeply personal. There are some metrics we can come up with that sort of capture it, but we can't reveal it fully. And I can say that, what we all know, the world is deeply unequal, but any given developed country, including the United States especially, is also deeply unequal. So here, the pandemic has hit in a highly asymmetric way as well. Again, there was that simple fact that I included in my presentation that 8% of adults hospitalized with COVID-19, only 8% of them have no known comorbidity. The relevant comorbidities, they increase in prevalence with lower socioeconomic status. So there are obvious associations between poverty in the United States and the likelihood that you'll suffer severe disease. You are much more likely to suffer severe disease in the United States if you're poor, for myriad reasons. Right? So the pandemic is highly asymmetric here as well. I know there was something else I wanted to say, but I don't remember.
Okay, that's fine. So thank you very much, Felipe and Don. I like the way you framed the question of the paradox, that we are trying to preserve life within a system where we are denying it. And then you said, yes, we might have the technological means to kind of, manage somehow or the other, but the socio-economic supportive system that we really do not have, and we have, kind of selfish individuals in that sense, and we are really struggling. We're really struggling, and this is all over the world, as you say rightly, the so-called, global North or the global South, or whichever way you would like to look at it. And I like also what Don has said, the way the virus is mutating, and it's, it's going to become worse and worse. So nobody seems to have a clue on how many more mutations we'll have and how long this thing seems to last.
Francis, if I may, sorry. It will not become
Felipe,
worse.
Let me comment on that, Felipe. Felipe, no, I didn't say that, Francis. I think this is one of the points that evolutionary biologists want to make. It will continue to diverge and diversify. See, and this is where we cross into, we don't cross, we are in a gray zone. We are exactly where spirituality and science meet. And it's not because that area is indefinable, although in one sense it's unknowable because of the nature of the universe. Our tools limit us. Okay, we view, as Pope Francis wrote so well in both Laudato Si and in Fratelli Tutti, we view everything from our point of view. In semiotic words, that our Umwelt is our Umwelt. And I just want to emphasize that what you're seeing is the generation of diversity, basically the creativity, whether it affects us badly or not, of the universe. You're seeing it expand and explode as it's doing now. Yes, and it may get worse. It may not.
Okay, let's take before I take Atul Peter's question. There is Kuruvilla has a question there. From a scientific point of view, how many more months will we have to live with this? Any reasonable guess?
So can I was muted. Thank you for telling me that I should unmute myself. I'll try, Don and I will try to answer Kuru's question, but and maybe this point is relevant to it. And that's that a population of virus doesn't evolve to maximize lethality. This is an important point, right? A population of virus, like any other population of living things, evolves to persist, right? Persistence can come about in a variety of ways. There are all sorts of trade-offs that I have too little knowledge of, or trade-offs that are difficult to express. But a very important point is, again, a virus, even if it's Ebola, it doesn't evolve to maximize lethality. It's not the intention of the virus to kill. It is a byproduct of its action, like the mode by which it reproduces. So we don't expect the COVID-19 pandemic to get worse and worse, not because of the virus. At some point, again, this thing like a wildfire has to die out. And that's because we're adapting to the virus, and at the same time it's adapting to us. But it's adapting to us without the goal of maximizing lethality. The virus is just sampling new ways of persisting within a new host, so that we will get out of the pandemic. It's not possible to answer Kuru's question specifically. I'm sure there are people who model things and can give you reasonable guesses with confidence intervals, et cetera. But all of these things are ultimately subject to the test of time, and predictions of this sort fail all the time. I think our question, of course, is like, how are we going to help ourselves out of this? There's so much more that we could do as rationally organized humanity organized for itself. There's so many things we could do to make this better than it is. So many obvious things too, that it hurts. But the virus has no intention of killing us.
Yeah, there's another question there put by Kuru. What are some of the collective reasons, phenomenologically, for the tremendous resistance, not only to masks, but also to COVID? There seems to be a lot of resistance, and people don't want to wear masks, and we come together without any protocols, or very careless about protocols and stuff like that. The minute we think they're a little safe, we let go of all the protocols and just come together. That's what's happening also in our country now. We have a lot of feasts. There's Ganesh Chaturthi, and we're going to have Diwali very soon, and we're going to have, phenomenally large number of people coming together to celebrate without masks and stuff like that. What would you think of that?
Phenomenological reasons, Kuru. I mean, I can only speculate. I'm going to give you a very evolutionary answer. Primates are inherently distracted. We love novelty, and we don't like to be tied down too long. We like to pick up a silver bell and then go on to a shiny golden bell. We do. We're absolutely horrible. Well, yes. How we ever became social is beyond me. I mean, I don't get it. But
there's plenty of novelty in being social.
Well, there's the reactions in this country to go back to the title of the talk, or the subtitle about what's going on in the U.S. are just almost inane to me. You people that are virulently anti-mask until they're on their deathbeds. I mean, personally, I don't want to do that experiment, and I'm not going to.
But so there's enormous distrust and there's enormous ignorance. Don and I talk about this all the time. I mean, Donald Trump was just our president for 4 years. A country that barely produces a man of that sort as president clearly has problems. And the problems are of our own making in part. They always are. And that's that our government and globally, of course, we failed to do what's best for the many. Again, we're organized around greed, as Charles Sanders Peirce put it 130 years ago. We're worshipers of the greed god. That has nasty consequences. And the people who are left behind, inevitably, many of us will become resentful. and again, this highly distrustful of authority in general, especially if it's telling us to restrict ourselves in some way, mask up because there's this invisible agent that might kill you. I mean, for us trained in biology and virology, it's all very believable. Like Don has been saying, people have been talking about the potential for an event like this for decades. And coronavirus virologists in particular have chosen to research that group of viruses because they knew that coronaviruses have enormous pandemic potential. And we just lived through SARS and MERS as well. Those maybe had the potential to be similar to what we're suffering through now. But again, the other side of that is there is enormous ignorance, and but more than anything, there's enormous resentment, I think, and it's the resentment that allows the ignorance to flourish and acquire new forms. It leads to so many conspiracy things that just fly in the face of reality, especially as it's given to us by the authorities that we've learned to not trust, people who are not providing for us.
There's a question here to Dr. Felipe. Thank you, Dr. Felipe. There is an increase in mental disorder registered during the pandemic. Most stress is building up in prediction of a third wave. How can we live with this?
I know how we find a way. I mean, I'm humbled to receive this question. I'm a young, extremely lucky man of 34 years. There's no way I could properly answer this. But we know humanity has gone through far worse things. We've gone through far worse things. We come out of it. It's sort of going back to Kuru's question, like what motivates us to gather and feast without wearing masks? There's like the will to live can engender a sort of fatalism too. It's not just that we think this virus, which we don't even necessarily believe in, will kill us or can't kill us, but we're willing to die for the sake of continuing to live. At the same time, like Paul says, there is a growing mental health crisis, and a lot of people are not going to get out of this any better. We're going through a really hard time, but we will get out of it. That's inevitable. So what do we do to make sure that we don't suffer in the needless ways that we're suffering now? I think we have to clamor for certain obvious structural changes wherever we find ourselves.
Feli, there's a good question in, I don't know if you can see it in the chat, from Subir Singh.
Yeah, we have various waves of the pandemic. Who decides these waves? What are the grounds on which the waves are named? Don, thank you for giving me the chance to answer this question. I happen to work in a lab at Baylor College of Medicine that's been doing a lot of surveillance through the pandemic. So people are hospitalized for a variety of reasons, samples are collected, and we test to see whether they have SARS-2 or not. So one way you can determine whether there are waves is just by analyzing that data through time. You can look at the number of hospitalizations associated with this virus per some number of people, and just track that. And wherever you see a peak, you can say there's a wave. And the truth is that the data actually do manifest that sort of structure. There are distinct waves, and it's not entirely clear what drives them, but new variants of the virus emerge, and of course we relax out of sort of pandemic-related restrictions, and we allow that new variant to propagate, and then it dies down as we go back indoors, we mask up a little more, the virus changes again, we relax again, and it recurs. But at some point, those waves will die again. We will exit the pandemic. You just can't say exactly when.
There's a question there from Devin to everyone. I mean, it's a comment. Many natural crises had natural answers in evolutions. Is it going to be the same that we need to wait for an answer belongs to nature in evolution? I don't know whether there's any response from Don. Would you like to say something? You being the evolutionary biologist.
Well, sure. I mean, Feli has a point and maybe we shouldn't make it so generally. There's a very Darwinian approach to this that I think is the best explanation. The pandemic will mitigate because it's a really bad strategy if you are an infectious agent to kill your host. I have very little doubt that even well, never mind. So who's left once a population of viruses have reproduced over time, over many viral generations, not human generations. Now we have to get some perspective here. Okay, these are going on in many viral generations in a human host. Who's left? The one that can leave the most copies of himself. In other words, you don't kill your host and you get yourself spread. That's not done intentionally. It's just what's left after a round of viruses or organisms, any organism in a population. So we've seen the same thing in almost all diseases. If you go back to the Spanish influenza pandemic that killed 50 million people approximately. All right, today we live with seasonal flu. Yeah, it still kills somebody. Excuse me, it still kills some people, but it's still here. It's still present. It mitigates over time. Now, it may not mitigate in our lifetimes. Spanish influenza did not just mitigate in my great-grandparents' lifetimes. It took some time because the host, the human, has a generation time that's much, much longer. So I think, okay, and maybe it seems like I'm missing something more specific in the question, Francis. You're muted, Francis.
There is a bat or something making noise in the background, so.
A bat. Oh, good. You know it at JD. You got the bats are beautiful. I love them in the evening, flying past my room in the hallway.
Yeah.
Okay, great. We have a question from Nishant, the new dean of philosophy there. Many environmental enthusiasts claim that the COVID-19 is a result of excessive human intervention in nature, and it is nature's way of setting its course right. Conspiracy enthusiasts, on the other hand, say it is a result of pharmaceutical companies to engineer such virus for huge financial benefits. Is there any grain of truth in either theory?
Don, may I try, Don?
Because go right ahead.
I know. I like.
You're baited.
I know.
He's like an open. He's like an open container of fossil fuel. You just threw a match into it. Watch him explode.
No, I just happily eat the bait.
Great.
I'm not sure if I prefer the bait or the hook. I think I like them both.
All of it.
It's just a fun question to answer because clearly there's a grain of truth in both, in that you understand people's reasons for thinking these things. Neither extreme is representative of the full truth, or there's no reason to imagine that. But one understands how these two possibilities might emerge in the minds of many people. And just to address them individually, so many environmental enthusiasts claim that COVID-19 is a result of excessive human intervention and it's nature's way of setting its course right. This idea of nature too, where we as scientists often think of ourselves as somehow apart from it. We're part of nature, so we are nature's fruit. In this case, nature would be a very wrathful mother to want to punish us in this way, and maybe maybe she's right for it. But again, it's partly true, because nature, again, we're a part of nature. Nature on the planet Earth consists of so many ecosystems interwoven into a complexity that we can't even convey in words. There's an entanglement of competing and cooperating intentions within this nature. So some of nature might be wishing to, right, bring humanity down a rung, but human nature, of course, human nature doesn't necessarily want that. But yeah, we need to live more sustainably. That's obvious. And then conspiracy theorists, on the other hand, say it's a result of pharmaceutical companies. Like Don is saying, I think there's every reason to think that this virus was not engineered in any way, definitely not by pharmaceutical companies, but there's also this theory that gain of function research somehow produced this, and there was a breakout of the lab. I guess we have to assign probabilities to everything, but I almost don't even think it's productive to take that seriously at all, because like Don has said, for decades now, reasonable people, many of them highly trained, have been saying that an event like this is possible. It's going to happen. And again, we had something like this 100 years ago with the Spanish flu, and we had, and we just went through another 2 SARS epidemics or coronavirus related epidemics in the last 10, 20 years before getting to where we are now. So COVID-19 doesn't require any evil pharmaceutical companies to do its bidding. Now there is evil there, right? In that we're organized around greed, and that has to change. We have to come up with new sets of rules that really do promote the flourishing of human beings. Mm-hmm. So there's a grain of truth in both theories, but neither theory is true. And then I want to quickly answer Pete Sorjuez Tony's question: to what extent can we trust the vaccines? Because that's a really important question. In the United States, we have access to really, it seems like 2 vaccines mostly. Don, is that the case? The Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, which are essentially the same. They're both mRNA-based vaccines, where the messenger RNA is a molecule that encodes one of the primary antigens of the SARS-2 virus. And there was a lot of clever work that went into designing these vaccines, and the clinical trials underlying their effectiveness are robust. So the vaccines do work to keep you from getting COVID-19, and if you get it, they work to minimize the chance that you'll suffer severe disease. In that sense, they clearly work. So if you're worried about dying from COVID-19 because you have a comorbidity, or if you have a loved one with a comorbidity and you don't want to spread it to them, or you just don't want to spread it to people who might die from it in general, which should be one of your motivating ideas or one of your motivations, then you should get vaccinated. I know India is making a DNA-based vaccine. I recently read about that, and I really don't know anything about it. In all likelihood, it's very similar to the mRNA-based vaccines that are now available worldwide, in that the DNA, which is a step behind the messenger RNA, the DNA is encoding for the spike protein of the SARS-2 virus that's locked into its pre-fusion conformational state. But I don't know to what extent this vaccine, right, the actual preparation of the thing really matters. You need to make sure that the DNA gets into the cells that will produce the antigen that lead to the immune response. I don't know how India's DNA-based vaccine has been tested, or to what extent it's been tested.
Well, I think we just have a minute left. So Don, would you like to conclude with a comment or two?
I just want to say thanks to everybody, Francis. As far as stress goes, wear your mask. If you can get a vaccine, get vaccinated. Socially distance. That makes us all able to help those that need our help. That's all I really have to say. It's great to see you guys. I'm
Thank
glad
you.
everybody's well.
I will hand over to Kuruvilla. Kuru, over to you. Unmute. Kuru, unmute yourself.
Thank you, Francis. Thank you, Don. Thank you, Felipe. Before concluding, I just want to invite all the participants to take part in a small essay competition. JCSR has been conducting this essay competition, and this year's theme is what Don just casually mentioned, the Veritatis Gaudium. May I just share my screen? You can have all the details of this essay competition in this site, JCSR. JCSR is a short form for JD Center for Science Religion .in. Challenges and promises of Fratelli Tutti. Fratelli Tutti, I believe, and Francis would very much agree, is one of the most precious documents, third encyclical that has come from Pope Francis. It is addressed to all people, not just Christians. And I believe that in Fratelli Tutti, we have the hope for the future, the hope for the survival of humanity. So just go through this, write an article which reflects your personal conviction for the well-being and flourishing of human society. About 2000 words. The last date is January 26, 2026. Please do join this. Once again, the site address jcsr.in/essay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Father.
Yes.
Yes, Father. Thank you, Father. We have come to the end of meeting. Now I call upon Brother Sandoz Xavier to say a word of thanks. Respected chief guest and resource persons of the day, and my dear friends, I deem it a great honor and privilege to propose a vote of thanks on this auspicious occasion. Allow me to start by giving glory to God for making today's inaugural lecture a resounding success. It has been our privilege to host all the members and audience of the meeting. I am thankful to all the participants for coming online, leaving aside for busy schedule and attending this meeting. I would like to take this opportunity to place on record of my heartiest thanks to all our honorable guests of the day, inaugural lecture speakers, Dr. Donald Frolich and Felipe and Piedra, for their thought-provoking insights. Thank you, professors, for enlightening us with your inspiring and motivating words. We are all more moved by your great achievement in the field of your research. You are an exemplary person, and we have a lot to learn from you. I would like to acknowledge my deep sense of gratitude to Father Virology and his team for organizing it. Thank you so very much, Father. I also thank Father Francis Gonsalves, the president, for making this event possible. We are also grateful to the IT team, Father Dinesh and Shaiju, for their invaluable support. Once again, a big thanks to one and all for your valuable presence. A pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much. Thanks once and all. Once again, All the best. See you. And as I said, please join the essay competition. Bye. Thanks, Don. Thanks, Felipe. Thanks, Francis.
Thank you, Kuru. Thank you, Francis. Thank you,
Thanks,
Don. Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Thanks, great.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, okay, so thank you. Dinesh, you can.
Yeah. Okay. I'll stop this.